Captain Marcus Thornfield had served the Royal Guard of Valdoria for 15 years, but he had never seen anything quite like this. The young Princess Elena, barely 12 years old, stood at her bedroom window in the East Tower of Rosehaven Castle, holding a small mirror that caught the afternoon sunlight. She angled it deliberately, sending flashes of light across the courtyard in what appeared to be a pattern. Marcus squinted from his position near the castle gates. 3 short flashes, followed by 2 long ones, then 3 short again. He had learned Morse code during his military training before joining the Royal Guard, and this looked suspiciously similar. But why would Princess Elena be signaling someone? And who could she possibly be communicating with? The captain's concern deepened when he noticed that the princess repeated the same sequence exactly 3 times before disappearing from the window. This was no random play with a mirror. Elena was definitely trying to communicate something important to someone outside the castle walls. Marcus had been assigned to oversee the security of the royal family's private quarters, which included monitoring any unusual activities. The recent political tensions in the neighboring kingdom of Astoria had put everyone on high alert. There had been whispers of espionage attempts and plots against the royal family of Valdoria. Could Princess Elena somehow be involved, willingly or unwillingly? The princess had always been known for her intelligence and curiosity. Unlike her older brother Prince William, who preferred sword training and horseback riding, Elena spent most of her time reading ancient texts in the castle library or exploring the hidden passages that connected different parts of the massive fortress. Her governess, Lady Margaret, often complained that the young princess was too adventurous for her own good. But this behavior seemed different. Over the past week, Marcus had noticed Elena acting strangely. She would disappear for hours at a time, claiming to be in the library. But when he checked, the librarian hadn't seen her. She had also started asking unusual questions about the castle's security measures and the daily routines of the guards. Most concerning of all, Elena had recently begun showing an intense interest in her stepmother's personal chambers. Queen Isabella had married King Edward just 2 years ago, bringing with her a collection of beautiful gowns, jewelry, and mysterious artifacts from her homeland in the far eastern kingdom of Luminara. The Queen's closet was said to contain not just clothing, but also ancient maps, coded journals, and family heirlooms that held significant political value. As Marcus watched the East Tower window, he made a mental note to investigate further. The safety of the royal family was his primary responsibility, and if Princess Elena was somehow involved in something dangerous, he needed to know about it immediately. The afternoon sun began to sink lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the castle courtyard. Marcus decided to position himself strategically, where he could observe both the East Tower and the main entrance to Queen Isabella's chambers. If Princess Elena was planning something involving the Queen's belongings, he would be ready. Just as he settled into his new position behind a stone pillar, Marcus noticed movement near the servants' entrance. A figure in a dark hooded cloak emerged from the kitchen area and began walking quickly toward the castle's outer walls. The person moved with purpose, occasionally glancing back toward the East Tower where Princess Elena had been signaling. Marcus felt his heart rate increase. This could be the person Elena had been trying to communicate with. He had to make a choice quickly. Follow the mysterious figure, or stay and monitor the princess. His training told him to alert other guards and pursue the potential intruder, but his instincts suggested that whatever was happening involved both Elena and Queen Isabella's chambers. The hooded figure reached the outer wall and seemed to pause, looking up toward the East Tower once more. In that moment, Marcus caught a glimpse of long auburn hair beneath the hood. It was a woman, though he couldn't make out her face clearly. She raised her hand in what appeared to be a subtle wave toward the tower, then disappeared through a small gate that led to the castle's herb garden. Marcus knew that gate was supposed to be locked at all times. Only a few people had keys to it, including the head gardener, the kitchen master, and members of the royal family. How had this mysterious woman gained access? And more importantly, was she working with Princess Elena? As darkness began to fall over Rosehaven Castle, Marcus made his decision. He would need to investigate Queen Isabella's chambers tonight. If Princess Elena was planning to access her stepmother's belongings, he had to be there to either stop her or protect her, depending on what he discovered. The captain spent the next hour carefully planning his approach. He knew the layout of the royal quarters better than almost anyone, including the locations of all the hidden passages and secret doors. Queen Isabella's chambers were in the west wing of the castle, connected to the main royal suite but with its own private entrance. The Queen's closet was legendary among the castle staff. It was said to be larger than most people's entire homes, filled with gowns from every corner of the known world. But Marcus suspected there was more to it than just clothing. Queen Isabella had come from a kingdom known for its scholarly pursuits and diplomatic intrigue. Her family had been involved in international politics for generations, often serving as mediators between warring nations. As midnight approached, Marcus positioned himself in an alcove near Queen Isabella's chambers. The hallway was dimly lit by torches, creating dancing shadows on the stone walls. He could hear the distant sounds of night guards making their rounds, but this section of the castle was generally quiet after the royal family retired for the evening. Marcus waited patiently, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He had no idea what he might encounter, but he was prepared for anything. The safety of Princess Elena and the security of the kingdom depended on understanding what was really happening behind the scenes at Rosehaven Castle. Around midnight, Marcus heard the soft sound of footsteps approaching from the direction of the east wing. Someone was coming, moving carefully but deliberately through the castle corridors. He pressed himself further into the shadows and waited to see who would appear. The footsteps grew closer, and Marcus could tell they belonged to someone trying to move quietly. This wasn't a guard making regular rounds or a servant going about normal duties. This was someone who didn't want to be discovered. As the figure came into view, Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. It was indeed Princess Elena. But she wasn't alone. Behind her walked the same hooded woman he had seen earlier in the courtyard. They moved together like they had done this before, clearly familiar with each other and with the route they were taking. Princess Elena carried a small lantern that provided just enough light to navigate the corridors safely. The hooded woman stayed close behind her, occasionally touching the princess's shoulder, as if to guide or reassure her. There was an intimacy to their interaction that suggested they had been planning this together for some time. Marcus watched as they approached Queen Isabella's chambers. Princess Elena produced a key from somewhere within her nightgown and carefully unlocked the door. The two figures slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind them. Now Marcus faced his most difficult decision yet. Should he immediately alert the other guards and arrest both the princess and her mysterious companion? Should he wait to see what they were actually doing before taking action? Or should he confront them directly and demand an explanation? His loyalty to the royal family ran deep, but his duty as captain of the guard was clear. No one, not even a princess, was allowed to break into secured areas of the castle without proper authorization. Yet something about the way Princess Elena had moved, the confidence in her actions, suggested that this wasn't a simple case of youthful rebellion or criminal activity. Marcus decided to give them a few more minutes to see what they were actually doing inside Queen Isabella's chambers. If they were stealing valuable items or searching for sensitive information, he would intervene immediately. But if there was another explanation for their behavior, he wanted to understand it before taking action that might harm Princess Elena or create a diplomatic crisis. The minutes ticked by slowly as Marcus waited in the shadows outside Queen Isabella's chambers. He could hear faint sounds from within, the soft rustling of fabric, whispered conversations, and what sounded like furniture being moved carefully. Whatever they were doing, it was clearly important enough to risk serious consequences. Finally, Marcus heard the sound of the door handle turning. Princess Elena and her companion were preparing to leave. He had to make his decision now about how to handle this situation. The next few moments would determine not only the fate of the young princess, but potentially the security of the entire kingdom. As the door to Queen Isabella's chambers began to open, Captain Marcus made a split-second decision. Instead of confronting Princess Elena and her mysterious companion immediately, he stepped forward just enough to make his presence known, but in a way that wouldn't startle them into running or screaming. "Princess Elena," he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of his position, but not the harshness of an accusation. "I think we need to talk." The young princess froze in the doorway, her lantern trembling slightly in her hand. Behind her, the hooded woman took a step back into the shadows of Queen Isabella's chambers. For a moment, nobody spoke, the silence stretching between them like a taut rope ready to snap. "Captain Thornfield," Elena finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can explain." I certainly hope so, Your Highness, Marcus replied, keeping his tone respectful but firm, because what I've observed tonight raises serious questions about both your safety and the security of this castle. The hooded woman stepped forward then, lowering her hood to reveal a face that Marcus recognized immediately. It was Lady Catherine Blackwood, a diplomat from the neighboring kingdom of Astoria who had arrived at court just 2 weeks ago as part of a peace delegation. Her presence here, in the middle of the night, with Princess Elena, in Queen Isabella's private chambers, was more than just unusual. It was potentially treasonous. "Lady Catherine," Marcus said, his hand moving instinctively toward his sword. "You're supposed to be in the guest quarters. These chambers are strictly forbidden to visitors, regardless of their diplomatic status." Lady Catherine held up her hands in a peaceful gesture. "Captain, I understand how this must appear, but I assure you that Princess Elena and I are not engaged in anything harmful to the kingdom of Valdoria. In fact, quite the opposite." Princess Elena stepped closer to Marcus, her young face serious in the flickering lantern light. "Captain Thornfield, Lady Catherine is here because we discovered something important about Queen Isabella, something that could affect the safety of our entire family and kingdom." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of discovery? Before Elena could answer, they heard footsteps approaching from the far end of the corridor. Multiple sets of footsteps, moving quickly and with purpose. Marcus immediately recognized the sound as other members of the royal guard making their rounds, likely having noticed his absence from his assigned post. "We cannot discuss this here," Lady Catherine said urgently. "If what Princess Elena has discovered is true, then there are people in this castle who cannot be trusted, possibly including members of your own guard." Marcus looked between the two women, his mind racing. His training told him to detain them both and alert his superiors immediately. But something in Princess Elena's expression, a maturity beyond her 12 years, suggested that the situation was far more complex than it appeared. "The old chapel," Elena whispered quickly. "Meet us there in 1 hour. Come alone, and come through the passage behind the kitchen pantry so no one sees you." The footsteps were getting closer. Marcus made another quick decision. "Go," he told them quietly. "Use the servant's stairway to return to your quarters. Princess Elena, you should be in your bedroom before the night guards check on you. Lady Catherine, can you return to the guest wing without being seen?" "Yes," Lady Catherine replied, pulling her hood back up. "Thank you, Captain. What we have to tell you could save the kingdom." As the two women hurried away in opposite directions, Marcus positioned himself casually near a window, pretending to observe the courtyard below. When his fellow guards rounded the corner, he greeted them normally and continued his patrol as if nothing unusual had happened. But his mind was spinning with questions and possibilities. What had Princess Elena discovered about Queen Isabella? Why was Lady Catherine involved? And most importantly, could he trust either of them? Or was he being drawn into some kind of elaborate trap? The next hour passed slowly as Marcus continued his duties while planning his route to the old chapel. The ancient stone building had been abandoned for decades, replaced by a newer and larger chapel closer to the main castle. It was the perfect place for a secret meeting, isolated, forgotten, and accessible through several hidden passages that most people didn't know existed. As the appointed time approached, Marcus made his way carefully through the castle's lower levels. He used the passage behind the kitchen pantry, just as Princess Elena had suggested, moving quietly past sleeping servants and through corridors lit only by occasional torches. The old chapel sat at the edge of the castle grounds, surrounded by overgrown gardens and crumbling stone walls. Moonlight streamed through broken stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the dusty floor inside. Marcus arrived to find Princess Elena and Lady Catherine already waiting for him, sitting on what remained of the front pew. "Thank you for coming," Elena said as Marcus approached. "I know this is irregular, but what we've discovered is too important to handle through normal channels." Marcus sat down across from them, his hand still resting on his sword hilt out of habit. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." Lady Catherine leaned forward. "It began 3 weeks ago. When I first arrived in Valdoria as part of the peace delegation from Astoria, my assignment was supposedly to negotiate trade agreements, but my real mission was to investigate rumors that someone within your royal court was selling information to enemy kingdoms." "What kind of information?" Marcus asked. Military secrets? Diplomatic correspondence? Details about your kingdom's defensive capabilities, Lady Catherine replied. Information that could be used to plan an invasion or organize a coup. Princess Elena picked up the story. I became suspicious of Queen Isabella about 2 weeks ago. I noticed that she was having private meetings with visitors who weren't on the official court calendar. People would come to her chambers late at night, always using the servants' entrances. Marcus frowned. Did you recognize any of these visitors? Some of them, Elena replied. There was Lord Harrison from the northern provinces, who's supposed to be loyal to father, and Lady Mortimer, who manages our grain supplies. But there were others I didn't recognize. People dressed like merchants or craftsmen, but who carried themselves like nobility or military officers. Lady Catherine nodded. When Princess Elena approached me with her observations, I realized that Queen Isabella might be the source of the information leaks we'd been investigating. But we needed proof before making such a serious accusation against a member of the royal family. So you decided to search her chambers, Marcus said. That's an extremely dangerous course of action, especially for a 12-year-old princess. Elena's eyes flashed with determination. Captain Thornfield, I may be young, but I'm not stupid. I know what happens to kingdoms when they're betrayed from within. I've read the histories, I know about the fall of the Eastern Empire and the destruction of the coastal kingdoms. I won't let that happen to Valdoria. Marcus felt a grudging respect for the young princess's courage, even as he worried about the risks she had taken. What did you find in Queen Isabella's chambers tonight? Lady Catherine produced a leather satchel from beneath her cloak. Maps, she said, opening the satchel to reveal several rolled documents. Detailed maps of Valdoria's border defenses, troop positions, and supply routes. Maps that should only be available to your kingdom's highest military commanders. And sub-report of the chapel floor. Even in the dim moonlight, Marcus could see that it was incredibly detailed, showing not just major fortifications but also hidden paths, secret entrances, and weak points in the kingdom's defenses. There's more, Elena added quietly. We found coded letters written in Queen Isabella's handwriting. Lady Catherine helped me decode some of them. They contain detailed information about Father's military plans, including a proposed alliance with the mountain clans that was supposed to be completely secret. Marcus studied the map more carefully, his military training allowing him to recognize immediately how valuable this information would be to an enemy force. Where did Queen Isabella get these documents? Some of this information is classified at the highest levels. That's what we're trying to determine, Lady Catherine replied. But based on what we found, it appears that Queen Isabella has been systematically gathering intelligence for at least 6 months, possibly longer. Someone has been providing her with access to your kingdom's most sensitive military and diplomatic secrets. Marcus looked up from the map. Do you have any idea who that someone might be? Princess Elena and Lady Catherine exchanged a meaningful glance. We have suspicions, Elena said carefully, but we need more evidence before we can make accusations. What we do know is that whoever is helping Queen Isabella has access to the highest levels of government and military command. That narrows it down to a very small group of people, Marcus said grimly. Members of the Royal Council, senior military officers, perhaps a few trusted advisors. Lady Catherine nodded. Exactly. Which is why we couldn't bring this information to your superiors through normal channels. If Queen Isabella's accomplice is someone in a position of authority, reporting our discoveries could result in our deaths and the destruction of all evidence. Marcus stood up and began pacing the length of the chapel, his mind working through the implications of what he had just learned. If Queen Isabella was indeed a spy, it meant that King Edward had unknowingly married an enemy agent. The political and personal ramifications would be devastating, not just for the royal family, but for the entire kingdom. What do you propose we do with this information? He asked finally. Princess Elena stood up as well. We need to gather more evidence, but we also need to act quickly. Lady Catherine's intelligence sources suggest that whatever Queen Isabella is planning, it's going to happen soon. Possibly within the next few days. What kind of action? Marcus asked. Lady Catherine rolled up the map carefully before answering. According to the coded letters we deciphered, Queen Isabella is expecting a signal from her contacts in Astoria. When that signal comes, She's supposed to provide them with the final piece of information they need to launch their operation. And what is that final piece of information? Princess Elena's expression grew even more serious. The exact timing and route of Father's planned inspection of the border fortresses next week. If enemy forces know when and where he'll be traveling, they could easily capture or kill him. Marcus felt the weight of the situation settle on his shoulders. This was no longer just about suspected espionage or diplomatic intrigue. This was about preventing the assassination of King Edward and potentially saving the kingdom from invasion. "We need help," he said finally. "But you're right that we can't trust the normal channels. Is there anyone else who could assist us without compromising our investigation?" Lady Catherine smiled for the first time since their conversation had begun. "Actually, yes. I have a colleague who infiltrated Queen Isabella's network weeks ago. Someone who's been feeding information back to Astoria's intelligence services and who might be able to help us identify Queen Isabella's accomplice here in Valdoria." "Who is this colleague?" Marcus asked. "Someone you already know and trust," Lady Catherine replied mysteriously. "But first, we need to return Queen Isabella's documents to her chambers before she discovers they're missing. If she realizes we know about her activities, she'll either accelerate her timeline or disappear entirely." Princess Elena picked up her lantern. "We also need to maintain our regular routines tomorrow. No one can suspect that anything has changed. Queen Isabella is very observant, and any unusual behavior could alert her to our discovery." As they prepared to leave the old chapel, Marcus realized that his life had just become infinitely more complicated. He was now involved in a conspiracy to expose another conspiracy, working with a foreign diplomat and a 12-year-old princess to prevent what could be the greatest betrayal in Valdoria's history. But as dangerous as the situation was, Marcus also felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. This was why he had joined the Royal Guard, not just to stand at attention and follow routine protocols, but to actually protect the kingdom and its people from real threats. "Tomorrow night," Lady Catherine said as they reached the chapel entrance, "we'll know who Queen Isabella's accomplice is, and then we can finally put an end to this treachery." The next morning dawned gray and misty over Rosehaven Castle, matching Captain Marcus Thornfield's mood as he went about his regular duties. Everything appeared normal on the surface, guards making their rounds, servants preparing for the day's activities, members of the royal family beginning their morning routines. But Marcus knew that beneath this facade of normalcy, a deadly game was being played. He positioned himself strategically throughout the day to observe Queen Isabella's activities without arousing suspicion. The Queen seemed to be following her usual schedule: breakfast with King Edward, a meeting with the castle's head seamstress about new gowns, and an afternoon walk in the royal gardens. But Marcus noticed subtle differences in her behavior that he might have missed before his conversation with Princess Elena and Lady Catherine. Queen Isabella's eyes were constantly moving, observing everything and everyone around her, with the practiced attention of someone accustomed to gathering intelligence. When she spoke with servants or courtiers, she asked seemingly casual questions that could provide valuable information about castle routines, guard schedules, and the movements of important visitors. Most telling of all, Marcus observed Queen Isabella having what appeared to be an accidental encounter with Lord Commander Davies, the kingdom's highest-ranking military officer, near the castle's main library. Their conversation looked casual to anyone passing by, but Marcus noticed that Lord Commander Davies handed the Queen a small scroll, which she quickly concealed within her sleeve. This discovery sent a chill through Marcus. Lord Commander Davies had access to every military secret in the kingdom. If he was Queen Isabella's accomplice, it would explain how she had obtained such detailed information about border defenses and troop movements. It would also mean that the betrayal reached the very heart of Valdoria's military leadership. As afternoon turned to evening, Marcus made his way to Princess Elena's chambers under the pretense of a routine security check. He found her at her writing desk, apparently working on lessons with her tutor, but she dismissed the elderly man as soon as Marcus arrived. "I saw the exchange between Queen Isabella and Lord Commander Davies," Marcus said quietly once they were alone. "I think we've found our traitor." Princess Elena nodded grimly. "I was afraid it might be him. Lord Commander Davies has been acting strangely ever since Queen Isabella arrived at court. He's been spending much more time in the royal quarters than his duties require, and I've seen him leaving her chambers on several occasions. Have you told Lady Catherine about this development? She's been maintaining her cover as a diplomatic visitor, attending the scheduled meetings with Father's trade advisors, but we're supposed to meet tonight after the castle settles down for sleep. Marcus looked around Elena's chamber, noting the maps and books scattered across her desk. For a 12-year-old, she had an impressive collection of military histories and political treatises. Princess, I need to ask you something that's been bothering me since last night. How did you first become suspicious of Queen Isabella? Most people would have assumed her late-night meetings were innocent social calls. Elena set down her quill and turned to face him. Because I knew Queen Isabella before she married my father. 3 years ago, when I was staying with my aunt in the capital city of Luminara, Queen Isabella was there as well. But she wasn't a queen then. She was Lady Isabella Ravencroft, and she was working as a translator for foreign merchants and diplomats. This was new information, and Marcus felt his understanding of the situation shift. You recognized her when she came to Valdoria? Immediately. But she clearly didn't remember me, or chose to pretend she didn't. I was much younger then, and I spent most of my time in my aunt's library rather than at social functions. But I remembered her because she was always asking questions about political situations in different kingdoms, claiming she needed to understand them for her translation work. Did you tell anyone else about this? Elena shook her head. I wasn't sure what it meant at first. It's not unusual for nobility to work in professional capacities before they marry, especially women from smaller kingdoms. But when I started noticing her late-night meetings and her intense interest in castle security, I realized that her background was probably more significant than it appeared. End. Marcus walked to the window and looked out over the castle courtyard, his mind working through the implications. If Queen Isabella was already involved in intelligence gathering before she married your father, then her marriage to King Edward might have been part of a long-term plan rather than a romantic coincidence. That's exactly what Lady Catherine and I believe, Elena confirmed. The timing of the marriage, just as tensions with neighboring kingdoms were increasing, seems too convenient to be accidental. Princess Elena quickly gathered up the papers on her desk while Marcus moved to answer the door, his hand resting on his sword hilt. It was Lady Catherine, dressed in the simple robes of a castle servant rather than her usual diplomatic attire. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Highness," she said loudly enough for any listening ears. "But the head cook sent me to ask about your dietary preferences for tomorrow's feast." Marcus stepped back to allow her to enter, then closed the door firmly behind her. As soon as they were alone, Lady Catherine's demeanor changed completely. "We have a problem," she said urgently, dropping the servant disguise. "My contact in Queen Isabella's network has sent word that the signal from Astoria arrived this afternoon. Whatever Queen Isabella and Lord Commander Davies are planning, it's going to happen tonight." Princess Elena stood up quickly. "What kind of signal?" Lady Catherine pulled a small piece of parchment from her robes. A coded message that was delivered to Queen Isabella during her afternoon walk. My contact was able to intercept and copy it before it reached her. The decoded message is simple, but ominous. The moon is full. Begin the harvest. Marcus felt his blood run cold. That sounds like a code for starting some kind of operation. But what harvest? What are they planning to begin? Based on the documents we found in Queen Isabella's chambers, we believe harvest refers to the assassination of King Edward during his planned border inspection, Lady Catherine replied. But the message arriving tonight suggests they might have moved up their timeline. Elena moved to her window and looked out at the darkening sky. The moon is indeed full tonight, and Father changed his plans this afternoon. Instead of leaving for the border inspection next week, he decided to depart tomorrow morning. He wanted to surprise the fortress commanders with an unexpected visit. Marcus and Lady Catherine exchanged alarmed glances. "How many people knew about this change in schedule?" Marcus asked. "Very few," Elena replied. "Father told the family at dinner. Lord Commander Davies was briefed this evening to arrange the military escort, and a handful of senior advisors were informed so they could adjust their own schedules. That means Queen Isabella learned about the change almost immediately," Lady Catherine said grimly. "If she's planning to signal the king's enemies about his route and timing, she could do it tonight and they would still have time to position themselves for an ambush tomorrow." Marcus began pacing Elena's chamber, his mind racing through possible courses of action. We need to stop this tonight, but we also need to do it in a way that doesn't alert Queen Isabella's contacts outside the castle. If they realize their plan has been discovered, they might try a different approach, or they might decide to attack the castle directly. There's another complication, Lady Catherine added. My contact informed me that Queen Isabella isn't working alone within the castle. Besides Lord Commander Davies, there's at least one other accomplice, someone with access to the royal quarters who can move freely without arousing suspicion. Princess Elena turned from the window. Do we know who this third conspirator might be? Not yet, but my contact is supposed to meet with me tonight to provide more details. The meeting is scheduled for midnight in the castle's wine cellar. Marcus stopped pacing and looked at both women. This is getting extremely dangerous. If Queen Isabella's network realizes they're being watched, all of our lives could be at risk. Princess Elena, I think you should remain in your chambers tonight while Lady Catherine and I handle the meeting with her contact. Elena's expression immediately became stubborn. Absolutely not. This conspiracy threatens my father and my kingdom. I'm not going to hide in my room while others take risks to protect us. Your Highness, you're 12 years old, Marcus protested. This is not a game or an adventure story. These are real spies and assassins who will kill anyone who threatens their mission. Which is exactly why I need to be involved, Elena replied firmly. I know this castle better than either of you. I know the servants, the routines, the hidden passages that even the guards don't know about. You need my knowledge if you want to stop this conspiracy without getting yourselves killed. Lady Catherine looked between Marcus and Elena, clearly weighing the risks against the benefits. She has a point, Captain. And honestly, at this stage, having Princess Elena's help might be the difference between success and failure. Marcus realized he was fighting a losing battle. Despite her youth, Princess Elena had already proven herself to be intelligent, brave, and resourceful, and as much as he wanted to protect her from danger, the reality was that the entire kingdom was already in danger, and they needed every advantage they could get. All right, he said finally, but we do this my way. Princess Elena, you'll stay with me at all times, and if I tell you to run, you run immediately, without argument. Lady Catherine, what can you tell us about your contact? His name is Thomas Ashford, and he's been working undercover as a merchant who supplies wine to the castle. He's actually one of Astoria's most experienced intelligence agents, and he's been infiltrating Queen Isabella's network for the past month. How do we know we can trust him? Marcus asked. Lady Catherine smiled slightly. Because Thomas Ashford is my brother. He volunteered for this assignment specifically because we knew the security of both kingdoms might depend on stopping Queen Isabella's plan. This revelation added another layer of complexity to the situation, but it also provided some reassurance. Family connections in the intelligence world weren't guarantees of loyalty, but they were stronger than most other bonds. What's the plan for tonight's meeting? Elena asked. Lady Catherine pulled out a small map of the castle's lower levels. Thomas will enter through the delivery entrance near the kitchen at midnight. He'll make his way to the wine cellar and wait for me there. I'm supposed to bring any new information we've gathered, and he'll share what he's learned about Queen Isabella's final preparations. Marcus studied the map, noting the various routes between the wine cellar and other parts of the castle. The wine cellar is a good choice for a secret meeting. It's isolated, soundproof, and there are multiple escape routes if something goes wrong. But it's also a potential trap if Queen Isabella's people discover the meeting. That's a risk we have to take, Lady Catherine replied. Thomas believes that tonight might be our last chance to gather the evidence we need to expose the entire conspiracy. After tomorrow, Queen Isabella and her accomplices will either have succeeded in their mission or disappeared entirely. As the three conspirators finalized their plans for the midnight meeting, none of them noticed the small figure pressed against the wall outside Princess Elena's chamber door. One of the castle's youngest servants, a girl named Mary who cleaned the royal quarters, had been listening to their entire conversation. Mary had been recruited by Queen Isabella months ago with promises of gold and threats against her family. Her job was to report any unusual activities or conversations involving members of the royal family. She had already sent several reports to Queen Isabella about Princess Elena's recent behavior, but what she had just overheard was far more significant than anything she had reported before. As quietly as she had arrived, Mary slipped away from Princess Elena's door and hurried through the castle's servant passages toward Queen Isabella's chambers. The young servant had no idea that her report would set in motion a deadly confrontation that would determine the fate of the entire kingdom. In Queen Isabella's chambers, the false queen was already preparing for the night's activities. Her elegant gowns had been replaced by dark, practical clothing suitable for covert operations. A collection of weapons lay spread across her bed: throwing knives, a crossbow, and a vial of poison that could kill within minutes. Queen Isabella had always known that this day would come, the day when her carefully constructed identity would be challenged and her true mission would be revealed. She had hoped to complete her assignment and escape before anyone discovered her deception, but it appeared that Princess Elena and her allies had been more observant than expected. No matter. Queen Isabella had survived much worse situations during her years as an intelligence operative. Tonight, she would eliminate the threats to her mission and complete her assignment. By tomorrow evening, King Edward would be dead, Valdoria would be vulnerable to invasion, and Queen Isabella would be safely back in her homeland, rich beyond imagination and celebrated as a hero. But first, she had to deal with a 12-year-old princess, a royal guard captain, and a foreign diplomat who had foolishly decided to interfere with forces beyond their understanding. Queen Isabella smiled coldly as she concealed the last of her weapons beneath her cloak. It was time for the harvest to begin. At 11:30 that night, Captain Marcus Thornfield led Princess Elena and Lady Catherine through the castle's forgotten passages toward the wine cellar. The ancient stone corridors were dimly lit by torches set far apart, creating pools of light separated by stretches of impenetrable darkness. Their footsteps echoed softly despite their efforts to move quietly. Marcus had chosen a route that avoided the main corridors and guard posts, using passages that connected the royal quarters to the castle's storage areas. These tunnels had been built centuries ago as escape routes during sieges, and most of the current castle inhabitants had forgotten they existed. "The wine cellar should be just ahead," Lady Catherine whispered as they approached a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. "Thomas will be waiting for us near the back wall, behind the largest wine casks." Marcus tested the door handle carefully. It turned without resistance, but he noticed that the hinges had been recently oiled. They moved silently instead of creaking as they should have after years of disuse. Someone else had been using this entrance regularly. The wine cellar stretched out before them, filled with massive oak barrels and stone alcoves lined with bottles covered in decades of dust. The air was cool and heavy with the rich scent of aging wine. Narrow shafts of moonlight filtered through small windows near the ceiling, providing just enough illumination to navigate between the storage areas. Lady Catherine led them toward the back of the cellar, where the largest casks created a maze of hiding places and shadowy corners. As they approached the designated meeting spot, Marcus noticed movement near one of the wine barrels. "Thomas?" Lady Catherine called softly. A figure emerged from behind the cask, and Marcus immediately recognized him as one of the wine merchants who made regular deliveries to the castle. Thomas Ashford was a man of average height, with weathered features that spoke of years spent traveling between kingdoms. His eyes held the cautious alertness that Marcus had learned to associate with professional soldiers and spies. "Catherine," Thomas replied, embracing his sister briefly before turning his attention to Marcus and Princess Elena. "Captain Thornfield, Your Highness, thank you for trusting me with this meeting. I'm afraid the news I have is worse than we anticipated." Princess Elena stepped forward. "What have you discovered?" Thomas glanced around the wine cellar nervously before answering. "Queen Isabella's plan is more complex than just assassinating King Edward during his border inspection. The assassination is meant to be the signal for a coordinated attack on multiple targets throughout Valdoria." Marcus felt his blood run cold. "Multiple targets?" "According to the information I've gathered from Queen Isabella's contacts, enemy forces from Astoria have been positioning themselves near 3 of Valdoria's major fortresses over the past month. They're waiting for word that King Edward is dead before launching simultaneous attacks that will overwhelm your kingdom's defenses." Lady Catherine pulled out the coded message they had intercepted earlier. "This harvest reference, it's not just about killing the king?" Thomas shook his head grimly. "The harvest refers to the complete conquest of Valdoria. Killing King Edward is just the first step. Once he's dead and your military command structure is in chaos, the invading forces will capture the border fortresses and march on the capital city. Princess Elena's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. How many enemy soldiers are we talking about? At least 3,000, possibly more, Thomas replied. They've been infiltrating your kingdom in small groups for weeks, disguising themselves as merchants, traveling craftsmen, and seasonal workers. By now, they're probably positioned within striking distance of their targets. Marcus began pacing between the wine casks, his mind working through the tactical implications. Even if we warn King Edward about the assassination plot, it might not be enough to stop the invasion. If Queen Isabella realizes her plan has been discovered, she could signal her allies to attack immediately rather than waiting for the king's death. There's another problem, Thomas continued. Lord Commander Davies isn't just providing information to Queen Isabella, he's been actively sabotaging Valdoria's defensive preparations. Over the past month, he's reassigned key officers away from the border fortresses, reduced patrol schedules, and created gaps in your early warning systems. So even if we expose the conspiracy, our military might not be ready to defend against a coordinated attack, Lady Catherine said. Thomas nodded. The situation is designed to be a trap with no easy escape. Queen Isabella and her handlers have anticipated most of the possible responses to their plan. Princess Elena had been listening intently to this exchange, and now she spoke up with a question that surprised all three adults. Thomas, you said Queen Isabella's people have been infiltrating our kingdom for weeks. Where are they staying? They would need safe houses, supply caches, communication networks. Someone local would have to be helping them. Thomas looked at the young princess with new respect. That's an excellent question, Your Highness. And you're absolutely right. This operation would be impossible without extensive local support. From what I've observed, Queen Isabella has been recruiting collaborators among Valdoria's merchant class, minor nobility, and even some castle servants. Marcus stopped pacing. Castle servants? At least 3 that I've identified, Thomas confirmed. They've been providing information about guard schedules, royal family routines, and the layout of the castle's defenses. One of them is a young girl who cleans the royal quarters. The mention of a servant in the royal quarters sent a chill through Marcus. Mary, he said quietly. The cleaning girl who has access to all the family chambers. Princess Elena's eyes widened. Mary has been acting strangely lately. She's been asking me odd questions about my daily activities, and I've noticed her listening at doors when she thinks no one is watching. If Mary has been reporting to Queen Isabella, then she might know about our investigation, Lady Catherine said urgently. We could be walking into a trap right now. Before anyone could respond to this alarming possibility, they heard the sound of footsteps approaching the wine cellar entrance. Multiple sets of footsteps, moving with military precision rather than the casual gait of servants or guards making routine rounds. Marcus immediately drew his sword and motioned for the others to take cover behind the wine casks. The footsteps stopped just outside the cellar door, and they could hear muffled voices engaged in what sounded like tactical planning. 6 men, maybe 7, Marcus whispered after listening carefully, armed and organized. This is definitely not a coincidence. Thomas had also drawn a weapon, a long dagger that looked well used and professionally maintained. We have 3 ways out of this cellar, he whispered back. The main entrance where they're waiting, a small window that leads to the castle's outer courtyard, and a tunnel that connects to the old dungeons. The tunnel is our best option, Princess Elena said quietly. But we need to reach it without being seen, and it's on the far side of the cellar. Lady Catherine was peering around the edge of a wine barrel, trying to see the entrance. They're not coming in yet. They might be waiting for Queen Isabella or Lord Commander Davies to arrive. As if summoned by her words, another set of footsteps approached the entrance. These were lighter and more careful, the steps of someone accustomed to moving silently. A moment later, they heard Queen Isabella's voice giving quiet instructions to the men waiting outside. Capture them alive if possible, she was saying. We need to know how much they've discovered and whether they've shared their information with anyone else. But if they resist, kill them quickly and quietly. Marcus felt a surge of anger at hearing Queen Isabella calmly planning their murder, but he forced himself to remain calm and think tactically. They were outnumbered and trapped, but they still had some advantages: knowledge of the cellar's layout, the element of surprise, and Princess Elena's familiarity with the castle's hidden passages. "When they come through that door, they'll be silhouetted against the corridor torchlight," he whispered to Thomas. "If we can create a distraction, we might be able to take out 2 or 3 of them before they realize where we are." Thomas nodded. "I'll circle around behind them while you engage from the front. Catherine, can you get Princess Elena to that tunnel entrance?" "I'm not running away while you fight," Elena protested quietly. "I can help." "Your Highness, the most important thing you can do is survive," Marcus replied firmly. "If we don't make it out of here, you're the only one who knows enough about this conspiracy to warn your father and save the kingdom." Before Elena could argue further, the wine cellar door swung open. Queen Isabella entered first, followed by 6 armed men wearing the dark clothing and leather armor of professional soldiers. They moved with the confidence of people who believed they had cornered helpless prey. "Princess Elena," Queen Isabella called out in a voice that was no longer disguised with false warmth. "Captain Thornfield, Lady Catherine, Thomas Ashford. I know you're here and I know why you're here. This doesn't have to end in bloodshed if you surrender now." Marcus exchanged a quick glance with Thomas, and they both nodded. They had worked together in enough dangerous situations to communicate without words. As Queen Isabella's soldiers spread out to search the cellar, Marcus and Thomas moved into position to spring their ambush. "You have 10 seconds to surrender," Queen Isabella continued, "or my men will start destroying wine barrels until you're forced to come out. I assure you that drowning in wine is not a pleasant way to die." That was the signal Marcus had been waiting for. He burst from behind his hiding place with a battle cry that echoed off the stone walls, his sword catching one of the soldiers completely by surprise. At the same moment, Thomas attacked from the opposite direction, his dagger finding its mark in another soldier's ribs. The wine cellar erupted into chaos as the remaining soldiers tried to respond to the sudden attack from 2 directions. In the confusion, Lady Catherine grabbed Princess Elena's hand and began pulling her toward the tunnel entrance at the far end of the cellar. But Queen Isabella was faster than they had anticipated. Instead of staying back to direct her soldiers, she drew her own weapons and went directly after Princess Elena. The false queen moved with the deadly grace of a trained assassin, her twin daggers flashing in the dim light as she pursued her primary target. Lady Catherine turned to intercept Queen Isabella, but she was no match for the spy's combat skills. Queen Isabella struck her down with a precise blow that left Lady Catherine unconscious on the wine cellar floor. Now it was just Princess Elena, alone and terrified, facing a woman who had been trained from childhood to kill without hesitation. Queen Isabella smiled coldly as she cornered the young princess near the tunnel entrance. "Poor little Elena," Queen Isabella said mockingly. "Did you really think a 12-year-old girl could outwit professional spies and soldiers? Your father will join you in death tomorrow, and then Valdoria will belong to its rightful rulers." But Princess Elena had not spent years reading military histories and exploring castle passages without learning a few things about survival. As Queen Isabella raised her daggers for the killing blow, Elena grabbed a heavy wine bottle from a nearby rack and hurled it with all her strength. The bottle struck Queen Isabella in the shoulder, spinning her around and causing her to drop one of her daggers. In that moment of confusion, Elena dove through the tunnel entrance and began crawling as fast as she could through the narrow passage that led to the old dungeons. Behind her, she could hear Queen Isabella cursing and shouting orders to her soldiers. The sounds of fighting between Marcus, Thomas, and the remaining soldiers echoed through the wine cellar, but Elena couldn't tell who was winning. All she knew was that she had to escape, find help, and warn her father before Queen Isabella's invasion forces received their signal to attack. The fate of the kingdom now rested on the shoulders of a 12-year-old princess crawling through a centuries-old tunnel in the darkness beneath Rosehaven Castle. Princess Elena crawled through the narrow tunnel as quickly as she could, her hands and knees scraping against the rough stone floor. The passage was completely dark, and she had to navigate by feeling along the walls and remembering the layout from her previous explorations of the castle's hidden areas. Behind her, she could still hear the sounds of fighting from the wine cellar, but they were growing fainter as she moved deeper into the underground network of passages. She prayed that Captain Thornfield and Thomas were winning their battle against Queen Isabella's soldiers, but she couldn't afford to wait and find out. The tunnel Elena was following connected the wine cellar to the old dungeons, which had been abandoned for decades when King Edward's grandfather had built newer, more humane prison facilities. From the dungeons, Elena knew she could access other passages that would take her directly to her father's chambers. As she crawled, Elena's mind raced with everything she had learned about Queen Isabella's conspiracy, the assassination plot, the invasion forces, Lord Commander Davies' betrayal, the network of spies throughout the kingdom. It was almost too much for anyone to believe, let alone a 12-year-old princess. But Elena had evidence, and she had witnesses who could support her claims if they survived the night. The tunnel began to slope upward, indicating that Elena was approaching the dungeons. She could see a faint light ahead, probably moonlight filtering through the barred windows of the old prison cells. As quietly as possible, she emerged from the tunnel into what had once been the main corridor of the dungeon complex. The old dungeons were eerily quiet, filled with shadows and memories of prisoners who had been held there generations ago. Elena moved carefully between the empty cells, heading toward the stairway that would take her back to the main levels of the castle. But as she reached the stairs, Elena heard footsteps coming from above. Someone was descending toward the dungeons, moving quickly and purposefully. Elena's heart sank as she realized that Queen Isabella's people might have anticipated her escape route and positioned guards to intercept her. She ducked into one of the old cells and pressed herself against the stone wall, hoping that whoever was coming would pass by without seeing her. The footsteps grew closer, and Elena could hear heavy breathing and the clink of metal armor. To her amazement and relief, the figure that appeared at the bottom of the stairs was Captain Thornfield. His clothes were torn and bloody, and he was moving with a slight limp, but he was alive and free. "Captain!" Elena whispered, stepping out of the cell. Marcus spun around with his sword raised, then lowered it when he recognized her. "Princess Elena, thank God you're safe. We need to get out of here immediately. What happened in the wine cellar? Are Thomas and Lady Catherine all right?" Marcus grimaced as he helped Elena climb the stairs. "Thomas is wounded, but alive. Lady Catherine is unconscious, but breathing. I managed to eliminate 3 of Queen Isabella's soldiers, but she escaped with the rest of her men. By now she knows that her plan has been discovered." They reached the main level of the castle and began making their way toward the royal quarters through passages that Elena hoped would be unguarded. "Does that mean she'll signal her invasion forces to attack immediately?" Elena asked. "Possibly. But first, she'll probably try to complete her original mission by killing your father tonight rather than waiting until tomorrow. If King Edward dies before dawn, her invasion forces can still proceed with their coordinated attack as planned." Elena felt a chill of fear run through her. "We have to warn Father immediately." "Agreed! But we also need to be careful about who else we trust. If Lord Commander Davies is involved, there might be other traitors among the castle guard. We can't be sure who is loyal and who has been compromised." As they moved through the castle corridors, Elena noticed that something was wrong with the normal nighttime security arrangements. Guards who should have been at their posts were missing, and there seemed to be more activity than usual in areas that were normally quiet after midnight. "Captain, look!" Elena whispered, pointing toward a window that overlooked the castle courtyard. Marcus looked out and saw what had alarmed the princess. Small groups of armed men were moving across the courtyard, but they weren't wearing the uniforms of the royal guard. These were Queen Isabella's soldiers, and they appeared to be taking control of key positions throughout the castle. "She's not just trying to kill your father," Marcus realized. "She's attempting to capture the entire castle. This isn't an assassination plot anymore, it's a coup." Elena and Marcus pressed themselves against the wall as a group of enemy soldiers passed by their hiding place. The men were moving with military precision, clearly following a predetermined plan to seize control of the castle's strategic points. "How many soldiers does she have?" Elena asked quietly. "I counted at least 20 in the courtyard, but there are probably more inside the castle. Lord Commander Davies must have arranged for them to enter through the service entrances without being detected by the loyal guards." Elena's mind was working furiously. "Captain, we can't fight our way through 20 or more enemy soldiers to reach Father's chambers, but there might be another way to warn him and get help at the same time." "What are you thinking?" Elena pointed toward a narrow stairway that led to the castle's bell tower. The emergency bells. If we can ring them, it will wake up everyone in the castle and alert the garrison in the outer fortifications. Queen Isabella's soldiers won't be able to maintain their surprise attack if the entire castle is awake and fighting back. Marcus considered this plan. It's risky. The bell tower is exposed, and once we start ringing the bells, Queen Isabella will know exactly where we are. But you're right that it might be our best chance to warn your father and rally the loyal forces. They began making their way toward the bell tower, using Elena's knowledge of the castle's layout to avoid the areas where Queen Isabella's soldiers were operating. The tower was located at the highest point of the castle, accessible only through a winding staircase that passed near several important chambers, including the royal suite where King Edward was sleeping. As they climbed the stairs, Elena and Marcus could hear sounds of fighting from other parts of the castle. Queen Isabella's coup was already underway, but there were clearly some loyal guards who were resisting the takeover. "Listen," Marcus said, pausing on the stairs. "Those sounds are coming from the direction of the royal quarters. Some of Queen Isabella's soldiers must have already reached your father's chambers." Elena felt panic rising in her chest. "We have to help him. Princess, we have to ring those bells first." "If your father is fighting for his life, the only way to save him is to bring reinforcements as quickly as possible." They continued climbing toward the bell tower, but Elena's fear for her father was growing with each step. When they finally reached the top of the tower, they found the massive bronze bells that had served as the castle's alarm system for centuries. Marcus began pulling on the bell ropes with all his strength, creating a thunderous clanging that echoed across the castle and the surrounding countryside. The sound was so loud that it would wake everyone within miles of Rosehaven Castle. Within moments, they could see lights appearing in windows throughout the castle, as servants, guards, and nobles were awakened by the emergency bells. In the distance, Elena could see torches moving in the outer fortifications as the garrison prepared to respond to whatever crisis had prompted the alarm. But their success in raising the alarm also made them targets. Enemy soldiers began appearing at the bottom of the bell tower staircase, shouting orders and preparing to climb up after Elena and Marcus. "We're trapped up here," Marcus said, drawing his sword as the first enemy soldiers started up the stairs. Elena looked around the bell tower desperately, searching for another escape route. The tower had windows on all sides, but they were too high above the ground to jump without certain death. However, Elena remembered something from her explorations of the castle's secret passages. "Captain, there's a rope system that connects this tower to the main castle roof," she said, pointing to a pulley mechanism in the corner of the tower. "It was used to transport supplies during sieges. If we can reach the roof, we might be able to get back into the castle and help Father." Marcus looked at the rope system skeptically. "Princess, that equipment is probably centuries old. Even if it still works, using it would be extremely dangerous." "More dangerous than fighting our way through a dozen enemy soldiers?" Elena asked. The sounds of armored feet on stone stairs were getting closer. Marcus made his decision quickly, testing the rope system to make sure it would support their weight. "Hold on tight," he told Elena as he helped her onto the rope platform. The pulley system creaked ominously as they began their precarious journey across the gap between the bell tower and the main castle roof. Below them, Queen Isabella's soldiers reached the top of the tower and began shouting in frustration as they realized their quarry had escaped. Elena and Marcus landed safely on the castle roof and immediately began looking for a way back into the building. The emergency bells were still ringing, and the entire castle was now awake and responding to the crisis. From their vantage point on the roof, they could see the full scope of Queen Isabella's operation. Enemy soldiers were fighting battles in several parts of the castle, but they were being overwhelmed by loyal guards who had been alerted by the emergency bells. In the outer courtyard, reinforcements from the garrison were arriving and beginning to surround the castle. "There," Elena said, pointing to a roof access door that led back into the castle. "We can get to Father's chambers from here." They made their way carefully across the slippery roof tiles and through the access door. The corridor inside was filled with smoke and the sounds of battle, but Elena navigated confidently toward the royal quarters. As they approached King Edward's chambers, they found the hallway filled with fallen soldiers from both sides. The door to the king's suite was partially open, and they could hear the sounds of sword fighting from within. Marcus burst through the door with Elena close behind him. and they found King Edward fighting desperately against 3 of Queen Isabella's assassins. The king was holding his own despite being outnumbered, but he was clearly tiring. Marcus immediately engaged 2 of the assassins while Elena grabbed a heavy candlestick and struck the 3rd man from behind. Within moments, all 3 enemy soldiers were defeated and King Edward was safe. "Elena! Marcus!" the king gasped, lowering his sword. "What in heaven's name is happening?" "Father, Queen Isabella is a spy," Elena said quickly. "She's been planning to kill you and help enemy forces invade our kingdom. We discovered her plot, but she launched a coup attempt to capture the castle." King Edward's expression went through several rapid changes as he processed this information. "Queen Isabella? But where is she now?" "Somewhere in the castle with Lord Commander Davies," Marcus replied. "They've been working together to betray Valdoria to the Kingdom of Astoria." As if summoned by his name, Lord Commander Davies appeared in the doorway of the royal chamber, his sword drawn and his face twisted with desperate anger. Behind him stood Queen Isabella, no longer bothering to disguise her true nature as a deadly assassin. "Your Majesty," Davies said with false courtesy, "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Princess Elena and Captain Thornfield are the real traitors. They've been working with foreign spies to undermine your kingdom." But King Edward was no longer in any mood to believe lies. The evidence of Queen Isabella's betrayal was all around him in the form of dead enemy soldiers and the sounds of battle throughout his castle. "The only misunderstanding, Davies, is that I ever trusted you," the king said coldly, raising his sword. "And Isabella, I don't know who you really are, but I know you're not the woman I married." The final confrontation was swift and decisive. Marcus engaged Lord Commander Davies in single combat, while King Edward faced Queen Isabella. Elena stayed back but remained ready to help if needed. Davies was a skilled swordsman, but Marcus had been fighting for his life all night, and his determination gave him the edge he needed. Queen Isabella was fast and deadly, but King Edward had been trained in combat since childhood, and his righteous anger made him formidable. Within minutes, both traitors lay defeated. Lord Commander Davies was dead, and Queen Isabella was wounded and captured. As dawn broke over Rosehaven Castle, the crisis was finally over. Queen Isabella's coup had failed. Her invasion forces had been intercepted by Valdoria's military after being warned by the emergency bells, and the kingdom was safe. Princess Elena stood with her father and Captain Thornfield on the castle balcony, watching as the last of the enemy soldiers were rounded up by loyal guards. Thomas and Lady Catherine had both recovered from their injuries and were helping to interrogate the captured spies. "I'm proud of you, Elena," King Edward said, putting his arm around his daughter. "Your courage and intelligence saved not just my life, but our entire kingdom." Elena smiled, but she also felt older and wiser after her experiences. "I learned that sometimes even a 12-year-old princess has to take action to protect what she loves." Captain Thornfield nodded approvingly. "Your Highness, you've proven that true nobility comes from courage and loyalty, not just bloodlines." As the sun rose fully over Valdoria, painting the castle walls golden in the morning light, Elena knew that she would never again be just a child playing at being important. She had become a true defender of her kingdom, and she was ready for whatever challenges the future might bring. The secret signal that had started everything, Elena's mirror flashes from the tower window, had been her way of communicating with Lady Catherine about Queen Isabella's suspicious activities. What had begun as a simple investigation into strange behavior had uncovered a conspiracy that threatened to destroy everything Elena held dear. But in the end, the real signal had been something much more powerful than flashing lights or coded messages. It had been the signal that courage and determination could triumph over treachery and betrayal, and that sometimes the smallest person could make the biggest difference in the fate of a kingdom.